You're scrolling through your phone when a notification pops up. System update available. Reality version 2.0. You laugh, assuming it's a prank. But then your screen flickers, and for half a second, the world pixelates. The coffee cup in your hand dissolves into a swarm of hexagonal fragments before snapping back. Your heart races. What if it wasn't a glitch? What if it was a reveal? We assume reality is a fixed stage, but quantum physics whispers otherwise. Particles exist in multiple states until observed, as if waiting for a command to render. The double-slit experiment isn't just about light, it's a clue. When unobserved, particles behave like code optimizing itself, avoiding unnecessary computations. Now imagine scaling this up. What if the universe itself is a simulation? Its laws not fundamental truths, but programmed constraints. Its beauty, a byproduct of efficient design. Philosopher Nick Bostrom argued there's a statistical likelihood we're digital minds in an ancestor simulation run by post-human civilizations. But here's the twist. If they're simulated too, who's running the base reality? Are we nested dolls in an infinite regress of simulations, each unaware of the layer above? Let's take this further. Suppose you discover a terminal hidden in your brain, a neural interface offering one choice: exit simulation. Do you press it? The allure is undeniable, meeting the architects glimpsing real reality. But what if the truth is unbearable? What if the outer world is a post-apocalyptic wasteland, and this simulation isn't a lab experiment but a refuge, a digital Eden preserving consciousness after Earth's collapse? Suddenly, the glitches make sense. The Mandela effect, déjà vu, ghostly apparitions. These aren't bugs but artifacts of imperfect rendering, cosmic lag in a universe-sized server. Yet this raises a darker question. Why allow suffering? If we're in a simulation, why permit war, disease, despair? Maybe pain is a feature, not a flaw. Without struggle, would we ever question our reality? Or is suffering the price of free will, a necessary variable to keep us too distracted to notice the seams? But here's where everything unravels. If we're simulated, our creators must also be simulated, ad infinitum. There's no prime mover, no ultimate reality, just an endless chain of illusions. This flips the script on spirituality. Gods, angels, afterlife promises, are they just higher-level users toying with our code? And what of morality? If nothing is real, do ethics matter? Consider this. A hacker alters your code to make you commit a crime. Are you guilty? Or are you just a puppet with sentient strings? Law and religion crumble under such paradoxes. Yet we cling to meaning, as if the simulation demands it. Maybe that's the greatest trick of all, the illusion of purpose. Now, imagine a deeper layer. Suppose the simulation isn't external but internal. Your brain, a biological quantum computer, generates reality like a dream. The universe isn't out there. It's a projection, a hallucination your mind renders to make sense of the void. This isn't metaphysics, it's physics. The holographic principle suggests the three-dimensional world is a shadow of two-dimensional information encoded on a cosmological horizon. Your life, your memories, your loves and losses, are they just data on the event horizon of a black hole? If so, death isn't an end, but a reformatting, a return to the source code. But then, why does it feel so real? Because it must. Consciousness, whether biological or digital, can't perceive its substrate. A character in a video game doesn't know it's made of pixels. It simply is. Yet, here's the sting. If we're all self-generated simulations, why do we share the same reality? How do our hallucinations align? Unless consensus itself is programmed, a shared hallucination enforced by the simulation's rules. Science, then, is reverse engineering the source code, uncovering the algorithms behind gravity, time, and consciousness. But what if some truths are firewalled? What if the simulation senses revelations that risk destabilizing it? This explains the eerie silence of the cosmos. The Fermi paradox, where are the aliens, might have a chilling answer. Civilizations that crack the simulation are erased. The Great Filter isn't an asteroid or AI uprising, but a cosmic delete button. So where does this leave us? If reality is a facade, is nihilism the only sane response? Or does the illusion's persistence hint at something transcendent? A Buddhist monk would say the self is already an illusion, yet compassion remains real. A physicist might argue that, simulated or not, the universe's mathematical beauty is undeniable. Perhaps meaning emerges not from truth, but from belief. You choose to love, to strive, to wonder, even if it's all a game, because the game is all there is. And if you think this is mind-bending, consider quantum immortality, the theory that you never die. The BBC prison study stands as a powerful reminder of how quickly human behavior can shift under the influence of authority and social roles. Picture this. A group of ordinary individuals, much like you or me, are placed in a simulated prison environment. At first glance, everything seems normal. There's no grand conspiracy, no dark forces at play. But as soon as these participants are assigned their roles as either guards or prisoners, something unexpected happens. The boundaries between what it means to be a guard or a prisoner blur, and with it, the behavior of these individuals becomes something more akin to what we'd expect from those in these roles in the real world. It's not just a shift in behavior. It's a total transformation of identity. The once peaceful, ordinary participants become either oppressors or the oppressed, following social scripts they may have never consciously agreed to. The question that rises then is this: how did it all happen so quickly? The BBC prison study was designed to explore how power dynamics influence human behavior, shedding light on the fragile nature of social roles. Based on the infamous Stanford prison experiment, the BBC study sought to understand how easily individuals can slip into roles of authority or subjugation when placed in an artificial setting. But the findings of the study were even more chilling than expected. While the Stanford experiment focused on how quickly power corrupts, the BBC prison study took a deeper dive into the way authority works, and how individuals in positions of power often become more oppressive, while those in lower positions form solidarity and resistance. It's a paradox of human behavior. The more power a person is given, the more they seem to demand, while those without power tend to find ways to cope with the loss of it. It's a demonstration of the deep psychological forces at play that shape our everyday interactions. The study was designed to be a controlled experiment, put participants in a prison-like environment, assign them roles, and observe the psychological transformations. The guards initially were given little instruction on how to exert authority, but almost immediately they began to adopt dominant behaviors, creating rules, punishing prisoners, and even becoming more aggressive over time. Meanwhile, the prisoners, who were expected to comply with authority, quickly started to feel the weight of their subjugation. The power dynamics took on a life of their own, with the guards asserting control and the prisoners responding either with quiet rebellion or passive resignation. Within days, the environment became hostile and uncomfortable, with both parties adopting behaviors far beyond the expectations set for them. What began as an ordinary experiment quickly spiraled into a scene that was eerily reminiscent of actual prison life. It was clear that the participants weren't simply playing roles, they were living them. The most unsettling realization from this study is how deeply we are influenced by social roles. It's easy to assume that we can maintain our identity and resist external pressure, but the BBC prison study suggests otherwise. The participants didn't just act as guards or prisoners, they became the roles they were assigned, and when they did so, they were stripped of the very qualities that made them individual. The guards, who were selected for their lack of prior behavioural traits indicative of aggression, quickly grew more authoritarian, while the prisoners, without warning, found themselves accepting the conditions of their oppression. This transformation, so rapid and so absolute, forces us to rethink the notion of individualism in society. What does it mean to be you when the environment you're in shapes your every action and reaction? How can we claim true autonomy if the forces around us are so capable of determining who we are and how we behave? Think about it. What if you were placed in the exact same experiment? Would you resist the role of the guard, or would you seize the opportunity to exert control over others? Would you fight against being subjugated, or would you find ways to cope, accept the role, and even become complicit in the system? The BBC prison study holds a mirror up to our deepest fears and assumptions about the human condition. We like to think of ourselves as individuals who are immune to social pressures. We pride ourselves on our ability to make independent choices, to think critically and act according to our own will. But the BBC study reveals that this is often an illusion. We can be easily moulded by the roles we are given and the situations we find ourselves in. This is not to say we lack agency altogether, but it suggests that the power of context and environment is far greater than we often realize. The game of death experiment forces us to confront the darkest corners of human nature, where our moral compass and sense of individual autonomy are put to the ultimate test. Imagine, for a moment, being placed in a reality show, surrounded by lights, cameras, and an unseen audience. The rules are simple. You, the contestant, are tasked with pressing a button that delivers increasing electrical shocks to a person in another room. You don't know this person, and you don't even see their face. Yet with every press of that button, you hear their screams, their pleas to stop. But there's a catch. There's a figure in a lab coat standing behind you, instructing you to continue. The voice is calm, authoritative, assuring you that everything is okay, that the experiment must proceed. You hesitate, but then you press the button again, and again, as the pain increases. What drives you to keep going? What makes you ignore your conscience and obey? The game of death experiment gives us the answer, revealing unsettling truths about human behavior, authority, and the power of obedience. In the 2009 game of death experiment, based on Stanley Milgram's famous obedience studies, participants believed they were taking part in a game show where they were required to administer electric shocks to another person as part of a test on learning and memory. However, what the participants didn't know was that the person they thought they were shocking was actually an actor, and no real shocks were being delivered. The true focus of the experiment wasn't to test learning, It was to see how far participants would go in obeying an authority figure, even when their actions were clearly causing distress. Shock after shock, the contestants were told to continue, even as the screams of the victim became more desperate. Many participants, despite clearly being upset and unsure about their actions, followed through with the instructions. They obeyed, seemingly helpless in the face of authority. The question arises, why would people continue inflicting pain, knowing they were doing harm? The game of death experiment delves into one of the most disturbing aspects of human psychology: our capacity for obedience. It challenges the illusion that we are completely in control of our actions and decisions. In the experiment, as in Milgram's work, the presence of an authority figure seems to strip away the moral agency of individuals. The contestants, ordinary people with no history of aggression or cruelty, did not immediately respond with resistance. Instead, they deferred to the authority of the figure in the lab coat, continuing to administer the shocks, even when they expressed concern or discomfort. The experiment revealed a fundamental truth. When people are told by an authority figure to do something, even something unethical, they are more likely to comply than we might expect. The shocking part isn't just that they obeyed, it's that they continued to obey, even when faced with the suffering they were causing. It raises profound questions about the nature of free will, authority, and personal responsibility. What makes this even more unsettling is that many of the participants in the game of death experiment were not simply passive, they were distressed. You could see the hesitation, the unease, the doubt. Some participants expressed concerns about what they were doing. Yet, time and again, they pressed the button anyway, following the command of the authority figure. This situation forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality. Just how much control do we really have over our own actions? Are we, in fact, as autonomous as we think? Or are we simply playing the roles assigned to us by the systems around us? This isn't just about one individual's decision to comply or rebel. It's about the larger forces that shape the very essence of human behavior. If people in the game of death experiment can act against their better judgment and ethical principles under the pressure of authority, can we truly claim to be in control of our actions in everyday life? The deeper implications of this experiment extend far beyond the confines of a game show. The results challenge our assumptions about human nature, authority, and ethics. We like to believe that we would never harm others, that we would never cross certain moral lines. But the experiment shows us how easily our ethical boundaries can be eroded when we are placed under the influence of an authority figure. This experiment, much like Milgram's original study, highlights the fragile nature of morality in the face of external pressure. It reveals how easily people can rationalize their actions when told that they are simply following orders. And it forces us to question the true extent of our moral agency. If we are so easily influenced by authority, how can we be sure that our decisions are truly our own? The My Lai massacre is one of the most horrifying and tragic events in the history of the Vietnam War, where hundreds of innocent civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, were killed by US soldiers in 1968. The question that arises from this tragedy, however, is not just about the act itself. It's about how ordinary soldiers could commit such unspeakable atrocities. How is it that individuals who, under normal circumstances, would not dream of harming anyone could be swept into a tidal wave of violence? The answer, in part, lies within the deep recesses of human psychology, where obedience, dehumanization, and group dynamics collide to overpower individual morality. Imagine, for a moment, that you are a soldier in a foreign land, surrounded by fear, chaos, and a mission that seems impossible. You've been trained to follow orders without question, to do your duty and protect your comrades. Then, one day, you are ordered to enter a village that you are told is a hotbed of enemy sympathizers. You are told the civilians are dangerous, that they are part of the enemy's network. But when you arrive, you see nothing but terrified, innocent people, men, women, children, and elderly who have no connection to the war you are fighting. And yet, your commanding officer tells you that you must clear the area, that they are the enemy, and that your orders must be carried out. You hesitate, but then the pressure mounts. Your fellow soldiers are doing it. Your commanding officer demands it. What do? The tragedy of My Lai was not just about the massacre itself. It was about the psychological forces that made it possible. The soldiers who participated in the killings weren't monsters. They were ordinary men. Some of them even described as sympathetic and compassionate before the massacre. But in the face of authority, fear, and peer pressure, their ability to differentiate right from wrong was clouded. The soldiers in My Lai were under the influence of a powerful authority figure, their commanding officer, who dictated their actions. This is where social psychology comes in. One of the most famous studies in this area, conducted by psychologist Stanley Milgram, examined how far individuals would go in obeying an authority figure, even when it meant causing harm to others. The My Lai massacre echoes the results of Milgram's experiments, where participants, even when faced with their own moral conflict, chose to obey authority figures and administer harm. In the case of My Lai, the soldiers were told that they were following orders to eliminate the enemy. But these orders were not just orders. They were backed by a larger narrative of war and duty, a narrative that dehumanized the civilians. In war, the enemy becomes a faceless, nameless other, stripped of individuality and humanity. The soldiers were not ordered to kill innocent people. They were ordered to eliminate the enemy, and in that moment, the villagers became nothing more than obstacles to the soldiers' mission. The psychological process of dehumanization played a key role here. By viewing the villagers as less than human, the soldiers were able to justify their actions, rationalizing that they were doing what was necessary for the greater good. This is where the moral paradox lies. The soldiers, though they likely understood that what they were doing was wrong, were swept up in a system of authority and peer pressure that made resistance difficult, if not impossible. The authority of their commanding officers, combined with the constant reinforcement of military culture, created an environment where questioning orders became nearly impossible. The result was a breakdown in the soldiers' moral judgment. They were not acting out of inherent malice, but because they were conditioned to follow orders without question. In such environments, even ordinary people can be driven to commit extraordinary acts of cruelty, not because they are evil, but because they are caught in a system that undermines personal responsibility. And yet, this brings us to an even more disturbing realization. If we are all capable of such actions under the right circumstances, what does this say about the role of authority in our daily lives? If soldiers in a war can be manipulated into performing acts of violence, how can we be sure that we too aren't susceptible to similar pressures in our own lives? The My Lai massacre forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. It challenges our assumptions about free will, individual morality, and the power of authority. The soldiers in My Lai, much like the participants in Milgram's experiment, were not inherently evil. They were ordinary people, thrust into an extraordinary situation where the boundaries of right and wrong became blurred. The tragedy is that in the face of authority and group dynamics, the soldiers allowed their personal morality to be overshadowed by the demands of those in power. The Abu Ghraib prison scandal, which erupted in 2004, stands as one of the most disturbing events in modern military history. The images of prisoners being tortured and abused by US military personnel at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq shocked the world. What makes this scandal so troubling is not just the acts of cruelty themselves, but the underlying question: how could individuals who were supposed to be upholding the law and protecting human rights fall so far from their moral compass? To understand the root of the abuses that occurred at Abu Ghraib, we must look not only at the soldiers involved, but at the complex psychological and social factors that allowed such atrocities to take place. Imagine yourself in the shoes of a soldier stationed in a foreign prison, far from home, surrounded by a foreign enemy. The pressure to extract intelligence is overwhelming. Your commanding officers demand results, and every day feels like a battle for survival. As you watch your peers become desensitized to the violence around you, the lines between right and wrong begin to blur. You are told that the prisoners are dangerous, that they are terrorists and must be subdued by any means necessary. When an officer gives you an order that feels wrong, you hesitate for a moment. But then the pressure mounts. The others are complying, and you're afraid that questioning authority might lead to punishment or ridicule. The momentary hesitation disappears, and you do what you are told. What happens when your own sense of right and wrong is overridden by authority, fear, and peer pressure? The Abu Ghraib scandal is an example of what happens when ordinary people who may never have had violent tendencies, are placed in an environment where authority, institutional pressure, and group dynamics allow, and sometimes encourage, unethical behavior. The soldiers involved were not inherently evil. They were, for the most part, young individuals who had signed up to serve their country. Many of them had no history of violence or cruelty. But under the conditions they faced, the very foundation of their moral judgment was compromised. Psychological research helps to explain how such atrocities occur. One of the most famous studies on this topic is Stanley Milgram's experiment on obedience to authority, conducted in the 1960s. Milgram's research demonstrated that ordinary people, when ordered by an authority figure, were willing to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to others, even when they could hear the victim's screams of distress. The study showed that the presence of an authority figure can powerfully influence an individual's behavior, pushing them to act in ways they normally would not. The soldiers at Abu Ghraib were not exempt from this dynamic. They were acting under the authority of their superiors, and they followed orders, even when they knew the actions they were being asked to carry out were wrong. But obedience alone doesn't explain the full scope of the atrocities. There was another critical psychological factor at play: dehumanization. Dehumanization occurs when one group of people begins to see another group as less than human, making it easier to justify mistreatment. In the case of Abu Ghraib, the prisoners were viewed not as individuals with human rights, but as enemies. Dangerous, faceless individuals who posed a threat to national security. This mindset made it easier for the soldiers to rationalize their actions and to see the prisoners as mere objects to be controlled, rather than people with dignity and rights. The concept of dehumanization is also linked to a phenomenon known as groupthink, where individuals within a group begin to conform to the attitudes and behaviors of those around them, often at the expense of their personal morals. In the high-stress environment of Abu Ghraib, where soldiers were under constant pressure and fear, the group dynamic played a significant role. Soldiers became desensitized to the brutality around them because it was normalized within the group. Peer pressure and the desire to fit in with their fellow soldiers often led to conformity, even if it meant disregarding their moral compasses. It became harder to stand out and question what was happening when everyone else around you seemed to accept the violence. The actions at Abu Ghraib were not the result of a few bad apples within the military. They were a symptom of a larger problem, a military culture that, under the pressure of war, allowed for the normalization of violence. The soldiers involved in the abuse were often acting in response to the systemic pressures they faced, including the desire to follow orders, the dehumanization of the prisoners, and the normalization of violent behavior. What makes the scandal so alarming is that it shows just how easily individuals, even those with no prior history of violence, the Lucifer effect, a term coined by psychologist Philip Zimbardo, challenges the belief that people are either inherently good or evil. It forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality. Under the right conditions, ordinary individuals can commit extraordinary acts of cruelty. This idea was powerfully illustrated in Zimbardo's infamous Stanford prison experiment in 1971, where students were randomly assigned to the roles of either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison. The results of the experiment were shocking, revealing how power, authority, and social dynamics could transform regular people into perpetrators of cruelty. Imagine you're a participant in a psychological study. You're given the role of a prison guard, and at first, the rules seem simple. But soon, the situation begins to shift. The prisoners, ordinary students just like you, begin to act out, challenging your authority. You're instructed to assert control, to teach them their place. The line between maintaining order and exercising power begins to blur. You start using intimidation, humiliation, and aggression to break the prisoner's spirits. At first, you're uneasy, but then it becomes easier. Your power grows, and so does your resolve. The experiment has only been underway for a few days, but what began as a simple task of maintaining order has transformed into something unrecognizable. You begin to question your own morality. How did you, someone who before this experiment was likely viewed as empathetic, become a person who was complicit in the abuse of others? This is precisely what Zimbardo sought to explore with the Stanford prison experiment. How and why ordinary people, placed in the right circumstances, can behave in ways that are completely contrary to their moral compass. The Lucifer effect is not just a concept, it's a direct observation of how situational factors can strip away personal responsibility, dissolve individual morality, and make way for harmful behavior. The guards, who were once normal college students, began to dehumanize the prisoners, viewing them as mere objects of control rather than human beings deserving of dignity. The prisoners, on the other hand, quickly adapted to their roles as subjugated individuals, becoming passive, submissive, and even broken under the pressure of the guards' abuse. Zimbardo's analysis of the experiment revealed an unsettling truth. People are not inherently good or evil. Rather, their behavior is shaped by the social and environmental factors they are placed within. The guards in the Stanford prison experiment were not sadistic or violent by nature. They were ordinary college students who, once placed in a position of power, began to exert control in increasingly cruel ways. Similarly, the prisoners were not weak-willed individuals, but rather young people who had been stripped of their autonomy and subjected to relentless degradation. The authority structures, peer pressure, and group dynamics they were exposed to played a critical role in their behavior. The Lucifer effect forces us to reconsider the nature of morality and authority. We often like to think that we are in control of our actions, that our moral choices are based on rational, ethical decisions. But Zimbardo's research reveals the power of social structures and situational factors in shaping behavior. Authority, anonymity, and group identity play a significant role in determining whether an individual will act in accordance with their moral values, or whether they will succumb to the pressures of their environment and commit harmful acts. The concept of dehumanization is also central to the Lucifer effect. When the guards in the Stanford prison experiment began to see the prisoners as less than human, viewing them as objects to be controlled and punished, it became easier for them to justify their actions. The prisoners, stripped of their names and identities, became faceless victims in a system that allowed for their abuse. This process of dehumanization made it easier for the guards to distance themselves from the moral consequences of their actions. After all, they weren't hurting real people. They were just dealing with subordinates, criminals, or objects. This phenomenon is not limited to a simulated prison. It occurs in many social systems, from real prisons to wartime settings, and even in everyday group dynamics. When individuals are categorized as other, they become easier targets for cruelty. Zimbardo's findings also shed light on the role of groupthink in facilitating harmful behavior. In the Stanford prison experiment, the guards were not acting as isolated individuals. They were part of a larger collective. The group dynamic of the guards reinforced their abusive behavior. The more they abused the prisoners, the more their fellow guards accepted and validated their actions. The Eichmann in Jerusalem case study presents a chilling dilemma that forces us to question the nature of evil, responsibility, and the role of authority. Adolf Eichmann, the man tasked with organizing the logistics of the Holocaust, was captured in 1960 and put on trial in Jerusalem. His defense, that he was simply following orders, would forever change the way we understand moral responsibility in times of war and institutional power. Eichmann's trial, more than just a moment of accountability for one man, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about complicity and the ease with which ordinary people can participate in horrific acts when they are embedded within larger systems. Imagine for a moment that you are in a position of authority within a vast institution. You have a specific task, a directive from higher-ups, and you are told that this task is necessary for the greater good. It doesn't matter whether you agree with it. The system demands compliance. You've been trained to follow orders. The consequences of not obeying are severe. Your career, your reputation, and even your life could be at stake. Now, imagine that the orders you are given involve something that, on its surface, feels morally wrong. But the higher-ups assure you that it's for a greater purpose. How far would you go? Would you question the ethical implications of your actions, or would you follow through, rationalizing that you are just one small part of a much larger machine? Eichmann, in his defense, claimed he was simply carrying out his duties. He wasn't personally responsible for the killings. He was just doing his job. This defense, that he was merely a bureaucrat, was the core of Eichmann's argument. At his trial, Eichmann did not present himself as a monster. He wasn't a sadistic killer, but rather a man who saw himself as an orderly official, carrying out orders to the best of his ability. Eichmann claimed that he had no personal animus against the Jewish people. He was not driven by hatred. He was a cog in the Nazi machine, organizing the deportation of Jews to concentration camps. Yet he was convinced that he was simply doing his duty. Eichmann's defense was built on the idea that he was not morally responsible because he had been following orders. This claim was met with severe criticism and a profound moral debate. Hannah Arendt, the philosopher who covered Eichmann's trial for The New Yorker, famously coined the term the banality of evil to describe Eichmann. Arendt argued that Eichmann was not a fanatical anti-Semite. He was an ordinary man, doing what he was told, unquestioningly. The banality of evil lies in the idea that the greatest horrors of humanity are often not committed by monstrous individuals, but by ordinary people who surrender their moral judgment to authority. Eichmann was not a sadistic figure. He was a bureaucrat who operated in a system that normalized cruelty. His actions, according to Arendt, were not driven by evil intentions, but by his utter inability to think critically about the consequences of his actions. His unquestioning obedience to authority allowed him to become a facilitator of genocide. Eichmann's case raises a fundamental question. How much responsibility do we have for our actions when we are simply following orders? The trial exposed a deep moral paradox. Eichmann wasn't acting out of personal malice or desire for power, but his actions led to the deaths of millions. He was a cog in a system that required individuals to perform horrific tasks without questioning the moral implications. The just following orders defense challenges our understanding of personal responsibility. Is a person absolved of responsibility if they are merely carrying out a directive, or do they bear moral responsibility for the harm their actions cause? This is where the real moral and psychological contradictions lie. Eichmann's actions were not driven by hatred or an inherent desire to cause harm. Rather, they were the result of a bureaucratic mindset, an unthinking adherence to authority, and an environment that dehumanized the victims. Eichmann never saw the Jews as individuals. He saw them as part of a larger process, a logistical task to be completed. This dehumanization made it easier for him to rationalize his actions, to compartmentalize the morality of the situation, and to claim that he was simply following orders. The banality of evil shows us that ordinary individuals, when placed in systems that remove personal accountability, and moral judgment are capable of extraordinary evil. But Eichmann's case is not just about him. It's a reflection of how authority and social systems shape our behavior. We live in a world where individuals are often expected to follow orders, especially in hierarchical institutions. The military, government, and corporate systems all rely on the obedience of individuals. What Eichmann's trial shows us is that we are all vulnerable to the influence of authority. The invisible gorilla experiment is one of the most revealing demonstrations of how our perception of reality can be deceiving. Conducted by psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Shabry in 1999, the experiment showed just how easily we can miss something right in front of us. In the study, participants were asked to watch a video of people passing a basketball and count how many passes the players in white shirts made. The task seemed straightforward. Track the number of passes. But hidden in plain sight, a person dressed in a full gorilla suit walked into the middle of the frame, stood still for a few seconds, then walked out. Astonishingly, nearly half of the participants failed to notice the gorilla at all. The gorilla wasn't hidden. It was visible for a full 9 seconds, and yet it went unnoticed by many. How could something so conspicuous be completely missed? The answer lies in the psychological phenomenon known as inattentional blindness, where we fail to notice unexpected stimuli when our attention is focused elsewhere. Imagine for a moment that you are deeply engaged in a task, like reading a book or walking down the street, and you're so focused on your immediate task that you miss something that's right in front of you. It might seem impossible that you could overlook something so obvious, but in reality, it happens more often than we think. The invisible gorilla experiment shows us that our perception of the world is not as reliable as we like to believe. While we might feel in control of our attention, the truth is that we are often blind to what's happening around us, especially when we're focused on a specific task. When we become fixated on one thing, our brain filters out other information, allowing us to concentrate on what we deem important. However, this filter can cause us to miss crucial details that could change our understanding of a situation or even our lives. Consider the implications of this experiment beyond just watching a video. How often in life are we so focused on one task or piece of information that we completely miss what's right in front of us? Have you ever been in a conversation so absorbed in what you want to say next that you don't truly listen to what the other person is saying? Or perhaps you've been so fixated on meeting a deadline at work that you miss critical data in the report, data that could impact your entire project. The invisible gorilla experiment isn't just about a gorilla in a video. It's about how easily we can miss what really matters when we concentrate too narrowly on one thing. It's a reminder of how easily our perception can be manipulated by the very focus we apply. What makes this phenomenon so alarming is that it's not just a quirk of perception. It can have real-world consequences. From missing a red flag in a relationship to overlooking important facts in a high-stakes business meeting, inattentional blindness is a reminder that the more focused we are on a specific goal or task, the more we risk missing other important information. In the world of decision-making, this can be catastrophic. When we focus too much on one aspect of a problem, we risk failing to see the bigger picture. Inattention can prevent us from noticing the things that truly matter. Whether that's noticing warning signs of a health issue, the presence of a new opportunity, or even the emotional state of someone we care about. The more engrossed we are in what's in front of us, the less we see of the world around us, which can skew our judgment and our perception of reality. The danger of selective attention, as demonstrated by the invisible gorilla experiment, is that it can lead to misjudgments and poor decision-making. Think about the world we live in today, one that is more connected and distracted than ever before. In the digital age, we're constantly bombarded with information, and our attention is pulled in multiple directions at once. We're scrolling through social media, answering emails, and consuming news all at the same time, with each new notification demanding our focus. This constant distraction can lead to more than just missing a gorilla on a video. It can mean missing out on what's truly important in our lives. We can miss the bigger issues in society, neglect the emotional needs of people around us, or even fail to see opportunities that could change our future. Inattentional blindness, as seen in this experiment, highlights the limitations of our attention. While our brains are incredibly powerful, they are also finite in their capacity to process information. We can only focus on a limited amount of stimuli at a time, and this focus often comes at the expense of other important details. This raises an important question. How much of the world do we really see? And how much are we missing without realizing it? When we choose what to focus on, we unintentionally choose what we don't see. The invisible gorilla experiment is one of the most revealing demonstrations of how our perception of reality can be deceiving. Conducted by psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris in 1999, the experiment showed just how easily we can miss something right in front of us. In the study, participants were asked to watch a video of people passing a basketball and count how many passes the players in white shirts made. The task seemed straightforward. Track the number of passes. But hidden in plain sight, a person dressed in a full gorilla suit walked into the middle of the frame, stood still for a few seconds, then walked out. Astonishingly, nearly half of the participants failed to notice the gorilla at all. The gorilla wasn't hidden, it was visible for a full 9 seconds, and yet it went unnoticed by many. How could something so conspicuous be completely missed? The answer lies in the psychological phenomenon known as inattentional blindness, where we fail to notice unexpected stimuli when our attention is focused elsewhere. Imagine for a moment that you are deeply engaged in a task, like reading a book or walking down the street, and you're so focused on your immediate task that you miss something that's right in front of you. It might seem impossible that you could overlook something so obvious, but in reality, it happens more often than we think. The invisible gorilla experiment shows us that our perception of the world is not as reliable as we like to believe. While we might feel in control of our attention, the truth is that we are often blind to what's happening around us, especially when we're focused on a specific task. When we become fixated on one thing, our brain filters out other information, allowing us to concentrate on what we deem important. However, this filter can cause us to miss crucial details that could change our understanding of a situation or even our lives. Consider the implications of this experiment beyond just watching a video. How often in life are we so focused on one task or piece of information that we completely miss what's right in front of us? Have you ever been in a conversation so absorbed in what you want to say next that you don't truly listen to what the other person is saying? Or perhaps you've been so fixated on meeting a deadline at work that you miss critical data in the report, data that could impact your entire project. The invisible gorilla experiment isn't just about a gorilla in a video. It's about how easily we can miss what really matters when we concentrate too narrowly on one thing. It's a reminder of how easily our perception can be manipulated by the very focus we apply. What makes this phenomenon so alarming is that it's not just a quirk of perception, it can have real-world consequences. From missing a red flag in a relationship to overlooking important facts in a high-stakes business meeting, inattentional blindness is a reminder that the more focused we are on a specific goal or task, the more we risk missing other important information. In the world of decision-making, this can be catastrophic. When we focus too much on one aspect of a problem, we risk failing to see the bigger picture. Inattention can prevent us from noticing the things that truly matter, whether that's noticing warning signs of a health issue, the presence of a new opportunity, or even the emotional state of someone we care about. The more engrossed we are in what's in front of us, the less we see of the world around us, which can skew our judgment and our perception of reality. The danger of selective attention, as demonstrated by the invisible gorilla experiment, is that it can lead to misjudgments and poor decision-making. Think about the world we live in today, one that is more connected and distracted than ever before. In the digital age, we're constantly bombarded with information, and our attention is pulled in multiple directions at once. We're scrolling through social media, answering emails, and consuming news all at the same time, with each new notification demanding our focus. This constant distraction can lead to more than just missing a gorilla on a video. It can mean missing out on what's truly important in our lives. We can miss the bigger issues in society, neglect the emotional needs of people around us, or even fail to see opportunities that could change our future. Inattentional blindness, as seen in this experiment, highlights the limitations of our attention. While our brains are incredibly powerful, they are also finite in their capacity to process information. We can only focus on a limited amount of stimuli at a time, and this focus often comes at the expense of other important details. This raises an important question. How much of the world do we really see? And how much are we missing without realizing it? When we choose what to focus on, we unintentionally choose what we don't see. The power of memory is something we take for granted every day. We believe our memories to be our personal truths, reliable records of past events that shape who we are. But what if I told you that some of your most vivid and cherished memories might not be real at all? Imagine recalling a childhood event with such detail, the sights, sounds, and even the emotions you felt. You've told this story over and over, and you're convinced that it's an accurate representation of your past. But what if that memory, one that feels so true, was never yours to begin with? The memory you've carried with you for years was actually planted in your mind. This is the core of the false memory implantation studies, a series of experiments that have revealed just how malleable our memories are. In one famous study, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated how easy it is to implant false memories. In the study, participants were asked to recall events from their childhood, and through subtle suggestions, researchers convinced them that they had been lost in a shopping mall at a young age, a memory that was entirely fabricated. But what's truly astonishing is how deeply these false memories were believed. The participants not only remembered the event, but added rich details and emotions, as if the event had actually happened. This phenomenon is called false memory implantation, and it shows just how easily our minds can be manipulated, even by the slightest suggestion. The experiment revealed that what we believed to be true about our past could actually be a distorted version of reality, a product of suggestion rather than an accurate representation of what happened. Now think back to a memory from your childhood, something you remember vividly. Maybe it's a family vacation or a special moment with a friend. Close your eyes and try to recall the details. The smells, the sounds, the emotions. How certain are you that this memory is real? Could it be that you too have been influenced by subtle suggestions or external forces? The more you think about it, the more you might wonder, how many of our memories are truly ours, and how many are distorted or fabricated without our knowing? This isn't just an academic exercise. The consequences of false memory implantation are far-reaching. If our memories can be so easily altered, how do we trust our recollections? If a memory can be planted with just a few suggestions, what happens when those suggestions are used maliciously? The implications are profound, not just on an individual level, but in the larger systems we rely on, like the legal system. Eyewitness testimony, for instance, has long been considered one of the most reliable forms of evidence in courts. But what happens when a witness's memory is manipulated or fabricated? If people can be convinced that they remember events that never happened, then what does that mean for the thousands of innocent people who have been wrongfully convicted based on faulty memories? The ethical questions surrounding false memory implantation are equally troubling. Should someone be held accountable for an action they remember, but which never actually took place? Can we, as individuals, be responsible for actions that exist only in our minds, not in reality? The issue becomes even more complex when we consider that these false memories feel just as real as any other memory. The brain doesn't differentiate between real memories and those that have been planted. Once a false memory is implanted, it becomes part of the person's internal narrative. It shapes their identity, their sense of self, and their understanding of the world. False memory implantation doesn't just challenge our understanding of memory. It forces us to rethink the nature of identity itself. If our memories are not trustworthy, then who are we really? Our sense of self is built on the memories we carry with us, the events we remember, and the stories we tell ourselves. But what happens when these memories are flawed, manipulated, or fabricated? Can we still trust ourselves? Or are we too victims of our own perceptions? When we start questioning the reliability of our memories, we begin to question our own sense of identity. But the implications go beyond just personal identity. False memories can be contagious, spreading not only through individuals but through entire communities. Think about the ways in which collective memories shape culture and society. What happens when a society collectively believes in a memory that isn't true? How does that shape national identity, social movements, or historical narratives? False memories can influence everything from how we view the past to how we make decisions in the present. When the collective memory of a society is manipulated, it can have lasting effects on how that society functions, how it sees itself, and how it engages with the world. Now, you might be thinking, this is just an experiment, a few isolated cases. The mirror self-recognition test is one of the most fascinating and thought-provoking experiments in psychology, designed to measure self-awareness in both humans and animals. The premise is simple. A mark, usually a red dot, is placed on an individual's body where they cannot see it, often on their forehead or face. The subject is then placed in front of a mirror. If the individual recognizes the mark on their own body and attempts to remove it by using the mirror as a tool, they are said to have passed the test, demonstrating self-awareness. But what does this test really mean? Is recognizing yourself in a mirror the true measure of consciousness? Or is it simply one aspect of a much deeper, more complex process? When we talk about self-awareness, the mirror self-recognition test is often one of the first things that comes to mind. It's easy to assume that being able to recognize ourselves in a mirror is a sign that we know who we are, that we are aware of our existence. However, the implications of this test go far beyond that. It challenges the very nature of identity, perception, and consciousness. It forces us to ask deeper questions. What does it really mean to know ourselves? What does it mean to have self-awareness? And if not all animals can pass this test, does that mean they aren't self-aware? Now, imagine this scenario. You're standing in front of a mirror, looking at your reflection. You notice a mark on your forehead. At first, it's a little strange. You don't remember putting it there, and you certainly don't want to be walking around with it. So you reach up and attempt to remove it, using the mirror to guide your movements. The process feels automatic, almost instinctual. You've recognized the mark as part of yourself, and now you're doing something about it. This ability to recognize the mark on your body through the mirror is what psychologists have long seen as an indicator of self-awareness. But what about the animals who fail the mirror self-recognition test? Chimpanzees, elephants, and dolphins are known to pass the test, demonstrating that they have some form of self-awareness. However, many animals, including dogs and cats, do not. Does that mean they lack consciousness or the ability to think about themselves? Or is it possible that the test itself is flawed, measuring only a very narrow aspect of self-awareness? After all, dogs may not pass the mirror test, but they certainly demonstrate emotional intelligence and a complex understanding of their surroundings. So, if animals like dogs can exhibit empathy, social bonds, and problem-solving skills, why do we continue to focus so much on visual self-recognition as the benchmark for consciousness? This brings us to a deeper question. Is our ability to recognize ourselves in a mirror the definitive measure of self-awareness, or is it just one of many indicators? The truth is, self-awareness is far more complex than a simple reflection in a glass. While the MSR test shows us that certain animals have the ability to recognize themselves as distinct entities from the world around them, it doesn't address the entire scope of self-awareness. The ability to understand our own thoughts, emotions, and identities goes beyond visual recognition. The test doesn't measure our awareness of the passage of time, our understanding of abstract concepts, or our ability to reflect on past experiences to inform future behavior. It doesn't test our moral consciousness, our empathy, or our awareness of others. In fact, many human infants fail the MSR test until they are around 18 to 24 months old. But that doesn't mean they lack self-awareness. Developmental psychologists believe that before infants pass the MSR test, they have already developed a sense of self in different ways, through their interactions with the world and their growing understanding of their own body and actions. It's simply that the test measures one specific aspect of self-awareness, and humans, like many animals, may possess other forms of self-awareness that the test doesn't capture. If we look at the implications of the MSR test from a broader perspective, we also see that it has profound philosophical implications. If we are to say that true self-awareness can be measured by our ability to recognize ourselves in a mirror, what does that say about our understanding of consciousness? Does it mean that animals who fail the test are somehow less aware of their own existence? Or does it suggest that our reliance on a single visual test is too limiting? After all, consciousness and self-awareness are complex and multifaceted. Should we be measuring consciousness in only one dimension? This philosophical question brings us back to the idea of personal identity. In our daily lives, we may define ourselves by our memories, our actions, or the relationships we have with others. We see ourselves through a lens of perception that goes far beyond what we see in the mirror. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation that can have a profound effect on a person's sense of self, reality, and emotional well-being. The term gaslighting originates from the 1938 play Gaslight and its subsequent 1944 film adaptation, where a husband manipulates his wife into doubting her sanity. Over time, the term has evolved to describe a situation where one individual systematically manipulates another into questioning their own reality, memory, or perception. It's a form of abuse that's insidious because it doesn't feel like abuse at first. In fact, gaslighting often appears as a benign interaction at the beginning. Sometimes it's disguised as concern, love, or care. But beneath the surface, it is an insidious manipulation that, over time, can completely distort a person's reality. Imagine being in a relationship where someone repeatedly tells you that things you are certain of never actually happened. You're sure you locked the door, but they insist you left it wide open. You distinctly remember an argument taking place, but they insist you are misremembering. At first, these incidents are small and easy to dismiss, but over time they start to build up. You begin to doubt your memory, you question your perceptions, and eventually you start to wonder if you are, in fact, losing your mind. That's the essence of gaslighting. It's a psychological tactic that leads you to question the very reality you've known. And the most dangerous aspect is that it doesn't always feel like manipulation. At first, it might seem like concern or an innocent mistake. The psychological mechanism behind gaslighting is subtle but deeply effective. The person doing the gaslighting doesn't need to lie outright. They only need to suggest that what you believe is incorrect. Slowly, you start to doubt your memories, your feelings, and even your own judgment. The person gaslighting you might say things like, "That never happened," or "You're remembering it wrong." And it's these repeated small doubts that chip away at your confidence. They are sowing the seeds of self-doubt, making you second-guess your own perceptions. Over time, you may find yourself relying more and more on the person doing the gaslighting, as they have become your primary source of validation and reality. This manipulation is not limited to intimate relationships. It extends into many aspects of life. Consider the case of a workplace where a boss subtly undermines an employee's confidence by questioning their recollection of meetings or decisions. The employee might recall a conversation clearly, but the boss insists it didn't happen that way, or that the employee misunderstood. Eventually, the employee begins to question their own judgment, becoming more unsure of themselves and less confident in their decision-making. This is gaslighting in a professional context, and it can be just as damaging. In these environments, gaslighting can erode self-esteem, cause confusion, and even lead to mental health issues like anxiety and depression. One of the most disturbing aspects of gaslighting is how the victim often feels that they are in the wrong, rather than recognizing the manipulation. The person being gaslit doesn't realize that their reality is being altered. They believe their emotions and perceptions are the problem, not the manipulator. This leads to the gradual breakdown of their self-identity. In extreme cases, victims of gaslighting may lose their ability to trust themselves, and in some situations, they may even become completely dependent on the abuser for guidance, validation, and a sense of reality. Now let's expand this concept beyond individual relationships. Gaslighting can also happen on a much larger scale in societal or political contexts. We see this in instances where people in power distort facts, deny historical events, or create confusion to manipulate public opinion. In the political sphere, gaslighting can look like a leader downplaying or outright denying an event that is clearly documented, causing confusion among the public about what actually happened. If enough people are gaslit, they begin to question the truth themselves, and a false narrative can take hold in society. This kind of manipulation doesn't just affect individuals. It can shift entire social movements, sway elections, and alter the collective understanding of history. The gaslighting dynamic on a societal level can be even more powerful because it taps into our collective cognitive biases. People tend to seek out information that confirms their existing beliefs, a phenomenon known as confirmation bias. When gaslighting is used on a societal scale, it feeds into this bias, making it easier for people to believe false information. Political leaders or media outlets may repeat distorted truths so often that the public begins to accept them as fact, even in the face of evidence to the contrary. The change blindness experiment reveals something startling about human perception. Despite our confidence in how much we see, we often fail to notice significant changes right in front of us. Imagine walking into a room and then, moments later, failing to recognize that the color of the walls has shifted, or that a large object in the center of the room has moved. How could you not notice something so glaringly obvious? It sounds impossible, yet studies show that this happens far more often than we realize. This phenomenon, known as change blindness, challenges our understanding of how we experience the world around us and raises important questions about the limits of our attention. The change blindness experiment is a powerful demonstration of how our brains are not built to process every single detail of our surroundings. Instead, we focus on specific aspects of our environment, filtering out the rest. In the classic experiment, participants are shown two versions of a scene with only one difference between them. The change could be as large as a person's clothing or as subtle as a door opening. Yet, despite knowing they are looking for the difference, many participants fail to spot the change at all. This demonstrates that our attention is selective, and the things we believe we're seeing might not be the full picture. In fact, we're often blind to changes that happen right before us, simply because our attention is focused elsewhere. This leads us to a profound question. How much of the world are we really seeing, and how much are we missing without even realizing it? Think about this for a moment. You've just seen a person walk into a room, and you're engaged in a conversation with them. Now, imagine that as you talk, this person subtly changes their appearance, perhaps their clothing, their hairstyle, or even their facial expression. But you don't notice. How could that happen? It's easy to assume that if we were truly paying attention, we would see every detail. But the reality is, we're often so focused on one thing, like the words in a conversation or the task at hand, that we overlook significant changes in our environment. The change blindness experiment reveals that our brains prioritize some details while disregarding others. And when we focus too intently on something, we may miss even the most obvious changes in front of us. This phenomenon isn't just a quirky experiment, it has serious implications in the real world. Think about the consequences of change blindness in high-stakes situations, like driving. When we're behind the wheel, we have to process a vast amount of information. Everything from road signs to other cars to pedestrians. But if we focus too much on one aspect of driving, we might miss critical changes in our environment. For instance, we might overlook a pedestrian crossing the street or fail to notice a car changing lanes. This kind of change blindness could lead to accidents or poor decision-making, simply because we were focused on something else. In legal settings, change blindness can affect how we remember and interpret events. Eyewitness testimony has long been considered a reliable form of evidence in court, but studies show that eyewitnesses often fail to notice important changes or discrepancies during an event. A person might be so focused on one aspect of a crime that they fail to see crucial details, like the presence of another individual or a change in the suspect's appearance. This suggests that human memory is not as reliable as we might think. Our perception of events may be flawed, leading us to misremember or overlook important details, especially when we are not paying attention to the full picture. Change blindness also extends into our personal relationships. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and missed a subtle shift in their tone or body language? You might have been so absorbed in your own thoughts or what you were saying that you failed to notice a change in the other person's emotions. This could lead to misunderstandings or missed opportunities to connect. In relationships, our ability to notice changes in behavior or emotional states is crucial. If we fail to recognize when someone is upset or withdrawing, we might miss the chance to offer support or resolve conflicts. But the most unsettling implication of change blindness is that it forces us to confront a deeper truth. Our perception of the world is far more limited than we think. We believe we see everything around us, that we are fully aware of what's happening. But in reality, we are often blind to the changes occurring right before our eyes. And because we cannot see everything, our understanding of reality may be flawed. We may believe we understand a situation or a person, but the truth is, we're only seeing part of the picture. This selective attention can affect everything from our personal choices to how we engage with the world. The concept of the mask of sanity is one of the most chilling and perplexing psychological ideas, drawing a line between the outward appearance of normalcy and the disturbing realities that may lurk beneath. The term was popularized by Dr. Hervey Cleckley in his groundbreaking work, The Mask of Sanity, first published in 1941. Cleckley's idea revolved around the notion that some individuals, especially those with psychopathic tendencies, can wear a mask of normalcy, appearing outwardly sane and rational, while underneath, their behavior is devoid of empathy, remorse, and conscience. The mask is so convincing, in fact, that these individuals often navigate through society undetected, manipulating others and leaving no obvious signs of mental illness. But how does someone wear such a mask, and why does it go unnoticed by those around them? The term mask is fitting because it emphasizes the illusion of normalcy. These individuals often have charming personalities, present themselves as fully functional members of society, and may even rise to positions of power or influence. However, beneath this veneer lies a profound emptiness, a lack of moral grounding and emotional depth. The mask of sanity refers to how these individuals appear sane and even admirable to those around them, while simultaneously harboring a deep and often destructive detachment from the world's moral compass. Cleckley's studies of psychopathy focused on the fact that these individuals can be highly manipulative and even violent, yet show no outward signs of being disturbed. This duality, the outward normalcy and inner disorder, raises significant questions about the nature of mental health and how we can truly know someone's character. One of the most disturbing aspects of psychopathy, as described by Cleckley, is how psychopaths can mimic emotions without truly feeling them. They can appear genuinely happy, compassionate, or loving, but these emotions are often used as tools for manipulation rather than expressions of genuine care. They might engage in deceit, charm, or even cruelty, all while maintaining an air of composure, blending seamlessly into society. This is what makes them so dangerous. They don't exhibit the typical signs of mental illness, such as delusion, hallucination, or erratic behavior, that we might expect to see in someone with serious psychological issues. Instead, they maintain a perfect mask that hides their true nature. The mask is a psychological construct that allows them to exist undetected, blending into the social fabric while causing destruction in their wake. Think about the people in your life, your friends, colleagues, or even public figures. How can you be certain that their actions align with their inner thoughts and feelings? Most of us rely on external cues to gauge the intentions and character of those around us. Body language, tone of voice, facial expressions. But what if these cues are misleading? What if someone can perfectly mimic the emotions and behaviors we expect to see in others without ever truly experiencing them? This is the terrifying possibility at the heart of the mask of sanity. It makes us question how we define sanity and whether the line between normal and abnormal behavior is as clear as we once believed. Cleckley's work brought attention to the fact that psychopathy, in its more subtle forms, is not always immediately recognizable. In fact, some of the most dangerous individuals can appear, on the surface, to be entirely normal, even charming. They can have successful careers, stable relationships, and well-adjusted lives. But underneath the surface, their lack of empathy, conscience, an emotional connection to others sets them apart. This disconnection from moral norms is what ultimately defines them as psychopathic, even though they may wear a mask that fools the world into believing they are just like everyone else. The real question that emerges from this is, how can we distinguish between someone who is normal and someone who is wearing the mask of sanity? What happens when we fail to recognize the signs? The most frightening aspect of psychopathy is that it often goes undetected for long periods. These individuals are not only skilled at hiding their true nature, but they may actively manipulate others to ensure they are seen as trustworthy, responsible, and caring. The mask is not just a passive cover, it is an active tool in the manipulation and control of others. This idea of the mask of sanity has profound implications for how we understand mental health. It forces us to reconsider our assumptions about the nature of normal behavior. If someone can appear perfectly normal on the outside, yet be completely detached from empathy and moral responsibility, then how do we define sanity? Is being able to conform to societal norms enough to be considered sane? Or does true sanity require an emotional connection to others? In 1973, psychologist David Rosenhan conducted a groundbreaking experiment that shook the foundations of psychiatric diagnosis. His study, titled Being Sane in Insane Places, sought to investigate the reliability of psychiatric diagnoses, especially the tendency to label people as mentally ill based on subjective observations and limited understanding. In this experiment, Rosenhan and 7 other pseudo-patients, all mentally healthy, feigned auditory hallucinations to gain admission to psychiatric hospitals. Despite exhibiting no further symptoms, all the pseudo-patients were diagnosed with various mental illnesses, and most were prescribed antipsychotic medications. This study forced the medical community to confront a disturbing question. How often do we misinterpret normal behavior as pathological, and how accurate are psychiatric diagnoses? The results of Rosenhan's original study were eye-opening. The pseudo-patients were admitted to 12 different hospitals across 5 states, and in all cases they were diagnosed with mental disorders, even though they had no psychiatric illness. One of the most troubling findings of the experiment was that not a single hospital staff member identified the pseudo-patients as imposters, although some of the patients themselves suspected that something was amiss. This failure to distinguish between the sane and the insane revealed a fundamental flaw in the way psychiatry approached mental illness at the time, relying too heavily on labels rather than understanding the actual experiences of patients. Rosenhan's study exposed a deep flaw in the psychiatric system. Mental health professionals relied heavily on subjective criteria and assumed that certain behaviors, such as admitting to hearing voices or behaving in a slightly unusual way, were clear signs of mental illness. The pseudo-patients, though completely healthy, had learned to feign a symptom that would be taken as evidence of psychosis. They pretended to hear voices saying empty, hollow, and thud. It was this one simple admission that led to their hospitalization, despite the fact that the rest of their behavior was entirely normal. This experiment challenged the very basis of psychiatric diagnosis, urging professionals to re-examine how they assess and categorize mental health. However, Rosenhan's experiment didn't just challenge the medical community's diagnostic practices, it also revealed the ways in which mental health institutions treated individuals once they were labeled as mentally ill. Once patients were diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder, the label seemed to stick, regardless of the person's actual behavior. The pseudo-patients in Rosenhan's study were subjected to the same dehumanizing treatment as the genuinely mentally ill patients in the hospitals. They were given medication, confined to sterile wards, and treated with suspicion. This treatment, coupled with the label of mental illness, led to further stigmatization, causing the pseudo-patients to be treated not as individuals, but as walking diagnoses. The findings of Rosenhan's experiment were not only disturbing, but also deeply relevant to the modern understanding of mental illness. They raised critical questions about the power of labels, the role of institutions in shaping perceptions of reality, and the ethical implications of diagnosing individuals without truly understanding their experiences. If professionals in the psychiatric field could be so easily misled, then how could we trust the accuracy of diagnoses for individuals who might not have the same social and cultural privilege as the pseudo-patients? It also pointed to the dangers of a system where patients could be reduced to a diagnosis, stripped of their individuality and human complexity. But the story didn't end there. In 1973, after the initial publication of the study, Rosenhan's findings became widely discussed, and many within the psychiatric community challenged the validity of the experiment. They believed that the pseudo-patients' experiences were exceptions, not reflective of the broader state of psychiatry. Some skeptics argued that Rosenhan had overstated the problem. In response, Rosenhan decided to revisit his original experiment in the late 1970s, taking the opportunity to critique the psychiatric system further. For his follow-up study, Rosenhan's team attempted to conduct a new experiment. He informed several psychiatric hospitals that they would attempt to send pseudo-patients into their facilities, but this time, the hospitals would not know in advance who the pseudo-patients were. The hospitals were told that out of a batch of new admissions, some patients might be pretending to be mentally ill. The results of this second study were staggering. The hospitals identified a number of fakes, but in reality, Rosenhan had not sent any new pseudo-patients at all.